And hi Dale and Natalie and Dad and everybody else. I did notice, I'm not sure if you probably noticed as well, that Adele was commenting a lot, watching live on YouTube on and off for the night. And I've noticed that quite a lot of people, I'm not sure if they don't realise that they can get involved in this conversation on Zoom without camera and audio. Or are they trying to get involved just on YouTube? So maybe we could plug that every now and then in the next block party, that they can join in on text alone if they want. Because there was actually quite a good few topics brought up and arguments as well, fair arguments. So I noticed Nolan was replying to a few of those, so just to say it again.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. Very good feedback.
Yeah, I agree, Steph, because some of us as well, unfortunately, my laptop is out of a commission, so I'm forced to go on this on my mobile phone, and I have it on, portrait, or not portrait, landscape kind of a view of it. So I kind of miss a lot of the text messaging that's going on as well. So I know that a lot of people would prefer to, text rather than speak. So, if anybody's on the phone, just letting them know they might be missing out some text as well. So if they have another device, go to that as well.
Can I ask a question about collective intelligence there, Jamin?
Absolutely. Anytime. 24 hours a day. What you got?
So, well, people in collective intelligence, how will they act? I mean, how will they, how will collective intelligence, I forgot my question.
Adam, you're stoned. Come on, man.
I guess I am.
Trying to have an intelligent conversation.
I am tired.
Listen,
you're right. I forgot. It took it about 2 seconds and I forgot it.
Thanks to you. Yeah. Thanks to you.
Go to the dungeon.
And all I had to do was look at you.
Our brothers and sisters in Ireland are going to think we're a bunch of stoners out here.
You used to be or whatever. I don't know.
Oh.
Maybe not now. Good for you.
I loved your earlier part of the talk anyway, Adam, if you can remember this still.
Yeah, I do remember, James. Thank you.
Doesn't count.
Yeah, you have to say again.
Everything said after midnight does not count.
It'll come to me. Just give me a minute.
You're asking about collective, like how is it going to be? How are people going to be? How are they going to act? Something like that. Yeah. He's so stoned.
Yeah, it was really good too. It just slipped my mind. Please, I hate that. Yeah, so collective intelligence. That's not exactly what I meant. And it just slipped my mind, so it's going to have to come back. I can't do anything about it. Sorry.
All right.
I hate to bait you like that.
Yeah.
Although it is kind of fun.
Okay.
All right.
I'm back in the kitchen.
Welcome back, Brett.
Oh. Charles, Adam is reminding me of those videos they put out where they get the grandparents high, or the police, the 3 policemen or something, and they say like, let's give them weed for the first time and see what happens. You've seen some of those videos. I gotta go hang out with Adam as well, though. That's such a good background there. Before we go, I guess we got, what, half an hour left, right? Is that right? I wanted to say thanks again to everyone who stuck around for this whole time, who's hosting it. Jamin, you made a really important point to me last night at some point, or day, or afternoon, that this is it's really important to have the spaciousness for people to share and even to have repetition and just getting to know each other and having friends and being friends. You know, and I want to also share from let's say a praxis standpoint or a slightly scientific-y standpoint. This is not like hard science, but in all of the research and living we've done, experimenting with co-creation and self-organization, right, and self-governance in these things, from living together with kind of a group like this that was 24 hours a day in a big house, a big building once for a year. So it was kind of like this for like a year straight with a core group of people. And I wish we would have just had cameras up. It would have been probably changed our lives, really. But through all of that research and just doing experiments, we came up with this little thing called the co-creation journey, or in homage of Joseph Campbell, I called it the user journey instead of the hero's journey, because it was relating to our software. They often use the user journey in software to like how you go about creating an experience. So we called it the user journey, and it had 7 steps. And the first step we called lounging. And lounging is this. It's sharing stories, sharing information, sharing wisdom. It's very feminine in terms of being receptive and listening and not rushing to anything. Compared to, I'm sure many of you are familiar, when you get into a space, people kind of rush to pitch their idea. It's like, here I am, here's what I do. And it's just like this thing where everyone's trying to get their piece in or trying to share what they do. So I just want to celebrate that. That's a massively important thing that you've done, the perspective you've taken to have time and patience and to just get to know each other. It probably sounds just like common sense to most people, but it's not actually, when it's also combined with what we're trying to do, which is create solutions and implement things. So this is not just a talk fest so we can all hear each other's voice in an echo chamber. So I want to be clear about that. It's not just a bunch of people that need to talk about themselves. We can do that all in our own spaces. So what you're doing is creating the process and the container to get to that cohesive sort of co-creation and implementation, but it doesn't happen. It doesn't really happen in earnest without this type of part of the process. So I'm almost saying, like, from our lens, like, your process is vindicated. Like, it is part of the process of actual co-creation. And I thank you for being a generous person, all of you, Nolan and Melissa and Jamin. I'm kind of pointing you out because I feel like I don't know the whole history, but it feels like you guys are the host in a way, or at least the original catalyzers. I don't mean to the exclusion of anyone else. I just feel like you guys are clearly like kind of hosting them to some level. So a big thank you. And I just thought about the compliment you gave me yesterday, Jamin, about being creative but yet disproportionately ego. And I want to just say I feel the same about you. And that was really a high-level compliment for me to receive. And I feel the same about you, my friend, and
Thank
Nolan.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on the tail of that, Brett, all my years with the First Nations people, when you first meet someone, you don't talk business. You sit and you share stories. And that's exactly what you're talking about. There's this slowness. I mean, you had that experience when you were at Standing Rock, right? With
Yeah.
your friend there. You get to know one another first before you do business. And in our culture, we do business first, and we don't really get to know each other necessarily.
Totally. There's a saying someone passed on to me last year, I think, which I liked, which was seek to understand before being understood. And I think that's a very helpful framework and attitude to have, really. And on another note, because I'm definitely going to come out and visit y'all, I need to spend more time with Indigenous culture and people. Now, I've been around, because I'm in this space, a lot of people that have that experience or appreciate it and know indigenous people. Hey, that's my friend Jeannie. Jeannie Jenny, I call her because I've been calling her Jeannie or Jenny off and on. She's a good friend of mine. So I was just saying, yeah, I need to spend more time around indigenous culture holders and medicine people, because it's like I keep somehow missing it. And I'll also share, to be honest and vulnerable, I've also had some resistance because a lot of the spaces I'm in, I feel like there's phony veneration and some kind of like phony veneration, and also this myth that like indigenous people know everything all the time and have all the answers to everything, which never really resonated with me. And I also got confused because so many of their indigenous groups can't get along with each other, and they're always like arguing and warring. And I'm like, why are these people such a paragon of peace? I mean, I'm not saying I'm right, and I'm not saying it's not biased and racist and all that. I'm totally being honest. And I've always had.
And I would say they would agree with you. They're just human beings.
Yeah.
But they do have beef. In 1491, they were, if you believe Charles Mann and you read his book, they were at least living respectfully and appreciatively of all our relations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally. I totally get they've got a huge nugget. They've got a huge nugget of wisdom and more history of tools for peace and talking and spirituality. I 100% agree with that. So I'm more telling my story where I noticed I started having this like resistance to doing that because I didn't feel like I had to, like there was not mutual respect. And then I had a couple of bad experiences, as we do, that frames our experience, where a couple elders, like they wanted me to listen to them for hours, and then when I was sharing and talking, it's like they were on their phone, and then and I was like, how does that work? So I had this kind of like, you have those experiences, and then you kind of it in a silly way it informs your future thing. So I want to change that, and I want to be introduced to more indigenous and elders that I can actually spend that quality time with. So I'll look forward, Melissa and others who are in that space, and Jenny's in that space too, to having more experience.
It's a really complex situation, and there's a lot of history. And you cannot, not you personally, but we, as in the you, as in we, as in VU, we can't just walk into their world and expect them to give it to us, give us their wisdom, give us their culture. They've had everything taken from them, and it continues. Some of the tribes are having a renaissance now where they're starting to learn their languages again and adopt their traditions again. But you have to remember that there are hundreds of years of suppression where they were forcibly removed from families and put into residential schools, boarding schools. They've suffered atrocities. And I would say that the wisdom is a living wisdom. It's not separate from them, from their way of life. And it's a connection that they have all the time, 24/7. It's not like they read it in a book and then you get it. You know, we're used to getting everything out of books, or we go to school, you know, we have teachers. This is something that's, I believe, in their DNA, as well as in the way they raise their children. And it's the way they relate to everything, whether it's an animal, a plant, another human being. And so my own personal experience took 14 years to download into me a whole other way of being. And there's a gentle way of coming into this other way of being. And the thing about the elders, I think that's quite funny because, and I think that's where you have to have a sense of humor when they were talking to you, and then when you started talking, they're on their cell phones. that there's a lot of lessons that we have to learn as non-native, and the thinking way and the living way of the native that I know, it's just very different from our system. So hopefully when you come here, I think what could be really interesting for you, Brett, is to actually come here when they're having one of the paddles along the coast, and you could actually just go and witness. So I would say for all of us who are not native, it's about witnessing, not trying to do more than that. Just witness, just be silent witnesses and absorb it. Yeah, go for it, James.
Yeah, loving to talk again. I'm just looking at a book there that I have had for quite a while. It was actually first published in 1972. It's called, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, The Sundance People by Richard Erdoes. I'm probably not pronouncing that name right now, but basically he spent a lot of time with the Native Americans, and a lot of his writing is about George Catlin, the artist, who spent a lot of time with back in the 1832 around then, with traveling out into the frontier, into the Native Americans, and painting their way of life and everything, and observing it and writing about it. And his observations then are taken by Richard Erdoes in this book as well. And just in relation to the conversation here, growing up is one of the chapters he had in it, and I'll just take a simple statement from the start of a sentence and about growing up in the plains. And the plains tribes had a saying that a man's most precious possession is not his horses, his weapons, or his fine teepee, but his children. And it was that's why the children were valued more, and kept near the grandparents as much as possible, so that they constantly learned, the old stories, because it's the grandparents that had the story, that passed on the story word for word as it was kept. And yeah, so it's a fascinating book, and it goes along with all. If you don't mind, I'll read a little excerpt about their order without law. He wrote a little chapter on order without law within the tribes.
That'd be great. I just wanted to say one thing, James, before you read that, if you don't mind. One of the things that the Haida do, and I'm sure other tribes, the reason the children grow up with their aunties and their uncles and their grandparents is because it's easier, they discipline the children, whereas the parents cannot. So that's kind of interesting as well. The extended family really is important for them.
Yeah. So, yeah, I get that. Will I carry on and just read out the first page? Yeah. So, order without law. Among a people without locks, keys, or money, there were no thieves. Warriors did steal horses from their enemies, but of these deeds of war, a man could be proud. Without lawyers, contracts, or anything in print, men found it impossible to cheat. Without jails, there could be no criminals. The tribes had no caste system, no classes, no inherited leadership, no underdogs. No man was as good or better than another. A chief remained a chief only by wise leadership and lavish generosity. He had no power to punish. He could not raise his hand against the meanest member of the tribe. In the democracies of the plains, every member of the tribe had his say. In a tribal council, he would be listened to respectfully and without interruption. It did not matter how long he spoke. There was plenty of time. Only if he did not speak to the point would the crier knock on the floor with his staff and remind him to stick to the subject. The Plains Indians loved a public debate and were proud of their speeches. They could not understand why the whites complained of their long-windedness. A good long speech was fine entertainment. In this way, matters of importance were settled by common consent. Men with opposite views had a chance to express them fully, as there were no cuss words in the natives' language. Men found it very hard to insult one another. So basically, the society of the Plains tribes was an open society in the truest sense of the term. Natives could have no secret, nor could they hide their deeds. There was no punishment if they did wrong, but they could be shamed into behaving properly. If nothing else helped, a man could be made into an object of ridicule. This law was enforced without jail. Sometimes there was bad blood between two men, and in anger, one of them would kill the other. Before people went crazy with drinking the white man's whiskey, this happened very rarely. But the killing of a tribal member was the worst thing that could befall a tribe. The sacred bundles in the medicine lodge had to be repurified. The whole tribe had to be cleansed itself of the deed. The killer's relatives went to the victim's family, offering to pay for his life with everything they possessed. The killer sometimes offered himself as a substitute provider and protector. That's just an example, but you know, these people, you know, we've lost too much.
They're still living like that, James, by the way. You know, that's my experience. And one of the things I was going to say is...
I understand that, definitely.
I've never heard, hang on a second. I've never heard anyone in the tribes gossip. No gossip. And supportive of one another. So if there's mental illness, there's alcoholism, they support each other. There's this profound love of each member, regardless of how they appear or what pain they're going through. And we don't have that. You know, we have that evil thing of gossiping and competitiveness, rather than seeing ourselves as a whole organism made of parts. We divide and conquer. You know, it's this sort of very dysfunctional way of behaving and being with one another. And that's what I love so much about the block party, is that we're all different ages, sex, genders, colors, backgrounds, but there's this common thing that we're coming together around, which is saving life on Earth. And I think that's a beautiful thing, you know, that we're all sharing ourselves in a very vulnerable, honest, transparent way, and not judging each other, you know, and just listening with open heart. And I think that's a really beautiful thing.
And I want to welcome Uncle Frank, my Uncle Frank.
Oops.
Hey,
Oh, yeah.
Uncle Frank, how you doing? You're on mute. Your microphone is muted.
I know. I wanted to keep it that way. But good morning,
Hey, Uncle Frank. Listen, hey, let me introduce you to our friends in Ireland. If you're in Ireland, wave your hand. There you go. See? And also Stephanie. Stephanie's got her camera turned off, but she's, anyway. So we've become very popular in Ireland, Uncle Frank.
Very good.
Hey, Ireland.
All right. Very good. Now, carry on. Don't let me interrupt.
No, goodness, it's no interruption, Uncle Frank. We're having a block party, and we're 10 minutes away from countdown. So you've arrived at the perfect time.
So, is it Jenny? Jenny? Am I pronouncing your name right? Jenny, you wrote, Native people are romanticized. What's that? Do you want to talk about that?
Hello. I guess I could represent my father's community, Elsie Booktook First Nation, New Brunswick, Canada. And I would say that many people think that Natives are, you know, laying around in a loincloth, being holy, praying to the Great Spirit and communing with animals. That's not true. There's been a lot of colonization.
Yeah.
And not everyone is, there's a mix. You know, lots of people say, you know, it's cool to be Native now or have Native ancestry. But within my own lifetime, ceremonies and stuff were still illegal in 1978. I was born in 1972.
Mhm.
And so there was a revitalization of Native culture in the 80s and the 90s, and through powwows and stuff, and lots of traditions being sort of bastardized and taken, lots of books being written. Lots of people think that people like Hemesta Storm and Sun Bear and them were traitors. I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying lots of people think that. The Northeast traditions are very much different than the Western traditions. We have our own traditions over here. We don't live in teepees. We live in houses. Although my partner would probably like to live in a, you know, a longhouse. And there is lots of Native people wanting to be more American.
Mhm.
So that means, you know, lots of cell phones and computer, and many nations are very poor. And the one thing that can't be taken is the spirit to survive. So a lot of it is survival.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of communities that don't want European people to come because there's still continuing history even today of a cultural appropriation is a big thing, and taking ceremonies and changing them and making profit off of them. That's still a big problem.
Yeah.
So just going to communities and working with them and observing them is a good idea. Not speaking. We don't teach on someone else's land, you know, kind of principles, but to just having deep conversations. We've been doing a lot of work here. I work with a group called Building Bridges, and we talk about decolonization in our area, especially in the Great Falls area over here. So there's many nations that came over here in this area. I want to thank you for giving me that opportunity to say that.
Thank
and
you.
I hope that it's our privilege to come together and have good conversations around culture and do something positive with it. Thank you.
Yeah, Hoa, thank you for sharing that, Jenny. And I was going to mention that I'm kind of tired, so I forgot. I slipped out of that chain of conversations. I'm really glad you brought that up. And when I was carving canoes with the Haida, it took about 7 years for me to finally be accepted by the people. And every time I'd go to a doings, like at the potlatches, when they'd hand out gifts, because I was the only white person there, the gifts would come down every row and then they'd skip me. and you know, I get it. I taught myself to not take that personally. And I was just really patient, and I wasn't trying to prove anything. I didn't go there to teach anything. The Spirit put me on that path. After about 10 years, one of the elders came to me and she said, "Melissa, I wish that all white people were like you." And so thank you for sharing that, because it is a genocide and it is a plight and people are having a hard time. And we don't need to teach anything to the First Nations people. We need to be silent witnesses and to just be and listen.
Yeah, finding good books. There's lots of good books written by Native people, and a lot of books that are out there that are written for the colonization culture, and that they're not accurate histories of the people.
Yeah.
If you want accurate histories of people, my dad always says, you know your family by eating together, you know your family by sitting at a fire, which means through our mythology and our stories that we share.
Yeah.
And that we know which means where location, like where you are, whose land are you on. If you're in America, you know, people are over here, they're doing ceremonies and they're having gatherings, but how many people actually acknowledge the territory?
Yes.
Like if I'm to acknowledge the land that I live on, I live in Shutesbury, Mass, at a community called Sirius, and this is Nipmuc land. So addressing the land that you live on, whose land is this originally of those people? In Europe, they still have a lot of those histories, you know who was on what land over there.
Yeah.
And in spirits of reciprocity, cultural reciprocity, and there's so many people that have come in different places. You know, you also know your family by working together. So through those three things, you know, being in service, mythology, and, you know, land, you can come together and have an understanding, and you create a new culture. The culture, like we're creating a culture right here with this conversation that we're having.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we are on Coast Salish lands. We have the Tulalip tribes. We have Lummi here, two of many. And what's really awesome here in the Northwest, well, Seattle, certainly people are starting to honor the Duwamish tribe. We actually should start this block party by honoring the Duwamish and the Coast Salish. So thank you for reminding us. Jamin usually does that. We got to start doing that again. So Hawa, thank you.
Thank you.
Glad you're here. So glad you're here, Hawa.
I just woke up really early this morning at sunrise. I usually wake up, it was a little bit after sunrise, and something told me go on my phone. I didn't know this talk was happening at all, but I don't know how I even came on this. I don't know how this happened, but I'm grateful. Thanks.
Yeah, I can really feel your spirit, Jenny. So I really want to thank you for being here and holding that spirit with us. And like you're at the center of our screen, which is really interesting. So I see you like a ceremonial fire that we're congregating around for healing, you know. We have to heal now. And we have to heal through sharing the stories and knowing the truth. And not to punish, but to heal because if we speak that truth, and then we can come to forgiveness, and then we can move on. We all have to shed these heavy traumas now in order to heal Mother, in order to go forward now into this new realm.
Yeah, I have my own healing to do. I have a hard time with older white males. That's my burden that I have. I work all the time trying to figure it out. In fact, when I first came on, some of the talking about Native people in the past tense was really triggering to me. I did leave the group for a few minutes.
Yeah.
Then I came back again with an offer from a nice man, I guess Nolan, I think that might be his name, saying we lost you, and maybe because I was just silently observing for quite some time. And what I wanted to talk about with the group is that we just had a group here this past weekend. We had about 45 people who were seed group facilitators of different communities, everything from pagan communities to feminist communities to politics, whatever it was. And some of the discussions that we talked about in smaller groups were allyship, privilege, not perpetrating cultural appropriation, and learning different cultures. And I don't mean just for Native people, but I mean for Native people all over this continent, Native European people, Native, Polish people, whatever that is. Because I had been to some ceremonies recently, and I thought I was going to a drum circle, and when I got there, I was realizing that it was a Lakota pipe ceremony. I felt very uncomfortable. So I just sat outside the door and prayed.
Mm-hmm.
But and I did not disrespect the people in there, but I just kind of felt like, how is this man here doing this ceremony for these people? I was confused about what was happening.
Yeah.
And so it made me think more. I found out the lady was German, and I was really wishing that we had some traditional German ceremony, because that would have been, for me, that would have been more, I would have really appreciated. Doesn't mean they have to do that, but I would have really appreciated hearing some traditional ceremony from where they come from.
Yeah, I think we're a really lost culture. And so we're looking for our way. And because there's a myth, well, it's true, but it's also a myth that Native Americans, like we were saying earlier, carry this medicine and this wisdom. I think Europeans, from my experience when I lived there, are really attracted to this, but not just Europeans. I think that, you know, non-native are very attracted. Like you were saying, there's this sort of romanticized notion about Native Americans, and how ironic, because here we're all this genocide, and then there's this romantic vision built up around what we've destroyed, basically. And that's kind of, I just find that very paradoxical and weird.
Yeah, there's still a lot of pain, especially over here in New England, where we have on our state flag still, we have you know, Massasoit on there, and it's got the blade, the machete over his head, and actually what that symbolizes is a severing of the head and the submission of the native nation over here, and it's still on our flag.
Wow.
And all over we have streets called Indian Leap, where the stories that we were told were that the native people in the area killed themselves on those places, and they refused to change the names of places, the names of, you know, so that it's like, it's in our language, it's in our it's in our culture, it's in our landmarks, this colonization, and it's in our schools. I don't know how many times I'd have to go to school to get my kids from being suspended or whatever for, you know, Cowboy and Indian Week and stuff like that. So you know, generations of not knowing what's going on. I've had this experience of the word aho, where lots of New Agers and stuff want to use that, and they think that's a native word. It's not a native word. It's New Age BS. If you want to say thank you at the end of, or so mote it be, or whatever the thing, please say it in whatever language or whatever tradition. You know, aho is just it's insulting, actually, especially to the people. If the majority of the people are Mohawk and you're saying aho, or the majority of people are, you know, Narragansett and you're saying, like, it's a generalization. It's not cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jeannie, does aho mean something in that language? Because if someone's saying it not because they think it's Native American, just because if it's their way of saying thanks, then I guess it's cool, right? Because it's not because they think they're honoring something. It's a neutral word. You're saying it's a neutral word, but people think it's indigenous, so they've been saying it because they think they're fitting in. Yeah.
Yeah. So some people think that it means like amen, or so be it, or like praising God or something. And, you know, in Japanese it means idiot. Just saying.
Well, that's perfect.
It is perfect. I'm just saying. Some of the word was changed. Like, some of the people think that it means like how, which means like to integrate it within the earth, and some people think that it's a Lakota word. Some people think it's a Kiowa word. It sort of rose in the 70s, you know, in communities, and sort of the spiritual bypassing community picked it up, and the New Agers, you know, intentional communities and rainbow gatherings or whatever, and it sort of changed into something like, you know, or so I don't know any Native people that can actually tell you where that word came from, so think about that.
Yeah. Well, I just have to say, though, I have heard tribal members down here using aho. So,
colonization.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
Polite this too, like people saying it like they're not trying to disrespect people. So if people are saying it, like, you know, like even my dad will say it at things too, you know, and like he knows what he's saying. He's just trying to be polite. If that's what people are saying, and then that's what people are gonna say. But to tell you the truth, I think I'd rather say thank you in whatever language of the people of the land that they're on, and asking what gratitude sounds like, and learning what gratitude sounds like of the people of that land, whether it's Finnish speaking, I don't know if Finnish, excuse me, if Finnish is not a language. I'm not sure what the language is of that place, but whatever of Dutch, right? If it's like Dutch or German or, you know, maybe it's Portuguese or whatever, but learning what the gratitude sounds like of those people that live on that land. That feels more authentic to me.
Yeah.
And this is just my mythology, so I might not even be right. But if you want to know what Native people think about the word aho, ask them.
Yeah.
Just ask them, the young people, and everyone's got their own ideas of what it is. But if you want to get a consensus, just start asking people.
Yeah, it's a good one.
I'll just add, I'm on the territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, and it does rub them, the Blackfeet or the Niitsitapi people, a little bit the wrong way. If someone's here and is talking about North America as Turtle Island, because there are not really any turtles on the Blackfoot Confederacy, so to call North America Turtle Island actually doesn't sit entirely well with them. So as Jerry is saying, I'm trying to learn my local, the traditional lands of my local indigenous neighbors and appreciate their culture.
So I know James had his hand up to say something. It is past 6 a.m. and these guys are super exhausted, and I want to be respectful, Jenny, to hear you through completely. Thank you for stepping forward and sharing your story with us. Please join us again, because I think this is a really important conversation that we need to continue if you're in game for that. And James, just jump on in. Anybody else before we say good night or good morning or whatever?
Yeah, James.
Thank you. Thank you. Gorov Mahagut, Jenny, August Fall Juroth, and welcome. That means thank you very much and welcome for joining us, and thank you for joining us. So Gorov Mahagut, Jenny, August Fall Juroth, which means thank you. And as one native Irishman to a native himself, to yourself, I would like to just offer that by no means or in any means did I mean any disrespect when I was reading or quoting from anything that was written back in 1832 about any of the tribes. Other than that, we were trying to, in this conversation, demonstrate that the majority of the civilized world and non-natives have lost touch with their story, and we were that was the general gist of our conversation. But again, God of Mahagut and Fajra.
You, James.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you, James, for saying that. And it feels like such a blessing to hear that language of some of my own ancestry as well. So thank you so much. What a blessing that is.
Awesome.
And I would also like to add to that as one Indigenous person to another as well, we are still suffering and viewing the scars of our oppression to this day as well, in the street names and in the in our heritage, a lot of which we've lost because of colonization as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
So time for healing now. It's a beautiful thing.
And this is the place for healing Mother Earth and healing ourselves and each other and all species and ecosystems, all peoples, the plant peoples, the tree peoples, the whale peoples, the salmon people, the human people, and Mother Earth herself. All righty, I am so honored and grateful for everyone here. Thank you so much.
Yay, another block party.
And we traditionally do a countdown, a 10-second
Jorge,
count.
Where's Jorge?
Yeah, we need Jorge for that. All right, Jorge. Okay, I'll lead it off. We'll just count down from 10. Okay, 10, 9,
8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Woo! See you next time.
Love you all. Thank you
Love
so
you
much.
all. Thanks for being here.
Take care. Take care all, and thanks for joining. Come back next week.
Come
All
back.
Y'all
right.
here?
Bye-bye.
Will Allen.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye, Melissa and Damon.
And we meet on Tuesday also at 11 a.m. Pacific time for the Solution Club. We'll have that up on Radish as well. So twice a week we meet. Everyone is welcome. And but the block party is our big special 24-hour long format. Ronald, good to see you. You came at the very end last time as well.
Yeah, well, I just tried to come in at the front and the back, and I'm still trying to figure out what this is.
Well, next time, hang out in the middle, and you'll.
Well, I
find
hung out for a long time with your initial explanations last night, and it sounded like, just sort of new age global thinking, and I never seemed to get down to what the infrastructure is underneath all of this to actually collect data and make it work. So that's where I'm looking for.
Okay,
And,
well, Ron, I'd recommend you go to radish.org and click on the block party page, block party banner, and then towards the bottom of that page, you'll see 30 minutes of Radical Collective Intelligence. And that gives a really good, solid intro all about the data and the logic and everything. So please give that a good view, and I'll be happy to answer
I will
any
watch
questions.
that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Woo!
Hey, how do I connect to George?
George.
W?
George. Wait a second. Which George?
The man you were just speaking to right now.
Oh, that's
I'm
Ronald.
Ron.
That's Ronald Henderson.
Ronald?
Henderson. Ronald, Ronald.
I'm actually a data collector.
Okay.
I've been working with people doing this kind of stuff for global change for the last 18 years. I would love
Oh,
to hook
wow.
up with you.
All right. How we do that?
Let's see. You said Ronald?